In this video, we'll demonstrate how you can capture images in a FormView control. Typically, when running on a mobile device, you would capture images using the camera on the mobile device, or you would select an image from the image library. Since we're running here in a desktop browser and we're using the HTML5 image capture, we're just going to capture the images from the file system. So you can see that on the left here we have a list control, which is the data source for our form, and here on the right we basically have the form where we can edit the data in the current row in the list. So if I click, for example, on John, we can go there and edit the value in the editor for that field. But for the picture field here, you can see it says click here to capture an image. So this opens up the HTML5 image capture, and since I'm running on the desktop, I'm just going to choose the image from the file system. So I'll go ahead here and choose the image, and then when I go ahead now and click the save button, you can see that we take that image and we add it back into the data source. So now if we click on another row, you can see that because the image is missing, we get the text here, but when we go back to that row, we get the image, and if we want to change the image, we can go there and change to a different image. So let's go back now and take a look at how this was configured. So we'll go back to design mode now, and let's start out with our list, which is the data source for the FormView control here. And we can see that in the list, this particular list is based on static data, but of course it could be connected to a SQL database. So in the list we just have a field called picture, and currently that picture field is blank. So this is going to be storing character data here, which means that we need to have the base 64 encoded value of the image, or in the case of a PhoneGap application, we could store the file name of the image. But since we're not running in a PhoneGap application, we're going to be storing the base 64 encoded data for the image. So if we go over to the Fields tab, we see that this picture field has been configured as an image. So we set the control here, the control type, to image, and then we've specified that the image data should be embedded into the HTML, which basically this is really asking whether we want base 64 encoded data to be stored in the list. So we choose that option over there, and then here of course we just have our list layout, and we display the picture field in the last column. So now let's go over to the form and see how that was configured. So here's our form control, and you can see that in the form control the picture field has been selected, but unlike the first name, last name, city and state, which have a control type of label, we've gone over here to this picture field and we've set the control type of this field to be image, and it says image data bound because the actual image itself comes from the data in the form's data source, as opposed to, say, a static image, which would be the same for every record in the form. So this is a data bound image that we've got over there. And then for data bound images, there are some properties that you can set. So you can specify whether the image data is base 64 encoded data or is a file name, and so this is the name property. So the name property would be appropriate if this was a PhoneGap application, because in a PhoneGap application, when you use the camera to take a picture, you can either get back the base 64 encoded data of the picture, or you can get the file name of the picture. And in disconnected applications, storing the file name of the picture is going to be hugely advantageous, because you'll be able to capture many more images while you're disconnected. But since this is not running in a PhoneGap shell right now, it's just a desktop application for the demonstration purposes, we're going to stick with base 64 encoded data. So let's pause now and pick this up in the next video. So we're continuing now looking at how we added an image capture field to our FormView control. So since we're using base 64 encoded data, the actual data, the base 64 encoded data that we're going to store, doesn't have the prefix necessary to display it in an HTML form. So here is the prefix that needs to get added on. So you can see here that we can pick from a builder here. So we can either be specifying that it's JPEG data that's base 64 encoded, or PNG data. So we've just chosen the JPEG option over here. So this is the prefix that's going to be added on to the base64 encoded data so that it can be displayed in the HTML for the FormView control. Then if there is no image in the current row that you're editing, you can specify some HTML that will be displayed instead of the image. So you can see here we've just simply said click here to capture an image. So this can be any HTML that you want. And then finally we've basically said that by tapping on the image, the user can actually open up the camera. So in effect what we're doing over here is saying that this field in the form is acting like a so-called immediate editor. In other words, we're not opening up a separate editor in an editor set to capture the value for the image. We're basically going to capture it directly from within the form when the user taps on the image. So the other option is to specify that there's going to be a button. So the user would tap on a button, and then here is the button HTML. And then here finally are the image capture settings. So you can specify whether you're going to use HTML5 image capture or whether you're going to use PhoneGap image capture. So since we're not running in a PhoneGap shell, we'll leave this at HTML5, and this is code to execute after the image has been captured. So you can leave this blank, but this is, if you want to add some additional JavaScript, you could go ahead and do that, but we can just leave that blank for the time being. There's no need to specify any code there. So all the code that needs to be executed is automatically generated by the genie over here. So you have some options here about how the image itself will be resized. So let's now go ahead, and since we've now turned this option to capture a tap on a button, when we let's just pause there and deal with that situation. So now let's run our component, and if we click on a row here, we see that in the case of a missing image, here's our text that says click here to capture an image. But once we do that, actually let's go back here to the form properties and change our button here to tap on a button. So now let's go ahead and run this now. So when we go here, there's our missing image HTML, but now we have a button, and we click on the button, we can capture the image, go to the next row, come back here. So instead of clicking on the image, we click on a button. So you can decide whichever user interface you want, and then if you want to control where this button appears in the template, you can actually go back to the form layout over here, and if you look at the template, you can see here it tells you that you can use curly bracket star button in the template. So if I go over here to the template and create a custom template, I can use curly bracket star button to precisely control where the button is placed in the HTML. But right now we're going to go here and just simply switch this back to tap on the image. So now basically the camera is going to be opened as soon as the user taps on the image. So what we've shown over here is how the image data can be captured as base64 encoded data and put into the data source for the form, and then of course if the list itself is persisted, then the base64 encoded data will be saved. If we had set this to file name, then when the list was persisted, the file name would have been updated to would have been uploaded to a server, and the data would have been persisted. Thanks very much for watching.